This CoinWeek podcast is brought to you by PCGS, the standard in the rare coin grading industry. Visit www.pcgs.com to learn more. In this episode of the CoinWeek podcast, I talked to Pamela Thomas and Loreen Williamson, co-curators of the Museum of UnCut Funk. We discuss their coin collection, the importance of African-American representation on money, and who they'd like to see on a United States coin. Hi, Pamela and Loreen. This is Charles Morgan from CoinWeek. How are you?
We're doing well, thank you. Good, thank you.
So I ran across your wonderful website a few years ago when my co-writer Hubert Walker and I decided to write an article discussing the growing tapestry of African-American representation on United States coins. We were delighted to find out that other researchers had put some legwork behind the project and came up with their own list. So tell me, how did your coin collection come about, and what is the Museum of UnCut Funk?
The museum, this is Pamela speaking. The Museum of UnCut Funk is a virtual museum that houses our collection of 1970s Black popular culture, artifacts from 1970s Black popular culture. So we have a unique collection of movie posters, Blaxploitation movie posters, about between 600 and 700 of them, American and international. We have a coin collection, stamp collection, comic books, and some sports memorabilia, in addition to a very large Black animation collection, which is currently on a national tour. And we are collectors at heart. I have a background in African-American history, and so, we put the museum together with not only housing and showcasing our collection, but putting a different spin on how to get people interested in history and showcasing different types of history that has happened through the Black experience.
Sorry, just to add to that, this is Loreen. The thing that's unique about the museum is we are a virtual museum. So we didn't start as a kind of brick and mortar space first. We started as a virtual museum. Our museum showcases our collection, as Pamela said, but it also pays homage to 1970s Black culture because that is the decade that we grew up in, and really what we think is a very underappreciated and represented decade in history because it was coming right after civil rights. And there's so many, first and groundbreaking things that happened during that decade that nobody really talks about and focuses on. It's like you go from slavery to, Jim Crow to civil rights, and then you go to like hip hop. So there's a whole, really rich decade of history that, is also reflected in the types of artifacts that we collect that we find to be, interesting and fascinating. That, we don't think gets the type of scholarly review and discussion and representation that it deserves. So that's, something that we've kind of set out to do. And Pamela also mentioned that we have our animation collection, which showcases the first positive Black characters ever seen on television, animated characters ever seen on television on tour. That's our Funky Turns 40 Black Character Evolution exhibition that's touring to museums around the country. And we're in the process of, kind of going from 100% virtual to taking our collection and, bringing them into the physical, museum space so more people can see them, in person and kind of, enjoy, how cool they are, but also learn the history behind them. And, we're doing that with our coins. We'll be doing that with our posters and with every aspect of our collection. So that's really what we're focused on now.
Are you surprised at the direction that the collection has taken since you started? As a fellow collector, I imagine that the collection has taken many twists and turns as you've made new discoveries.
You know what? Yes. Movie posters. And that's not because I was, I'm a film fanatic. I just like the representation of the images on the posters. And when I met Loreen, interestingly enough, she was a collector of animation. And one of the things that I had asked her was where was the black animation? And that kind of just opened the door to searching and looking and acquiring different types of artifacts. And as Loreen mentioned, because we're children of the 70s, and for us, the 70s is one of the coolest decades ever, collecting memorabilia from that era was crucially important to us because it just took us back to a time where it just seemed like it was cool to be black and everyone was kind of on the same page coming out of the civil rights movement going into the Black Power movement.
You look at the animation, for example. I was a big cartoon fanatic, every Saturday morning, watched all the cartoons and, had very fond memories of them. But because, you're growing up during that time, you're not necessarily cognizant of what's come before. So I really didn't understand at that time that all the characters, the black characters in cartoons, were very negative stereotypes. Also didn't understand that, my generation was the first generation that saw positive characters on cartoons. So, as you get older and you start to collect the stuff and you get a huge collection, you really say, gee, this is really cool, but what am I going to do with this? And, we started kind of kicking it around and said, gee, maybe we should create exhibitions out of this stuff. And you start to do the research. It's when you start to learn, gee, there's some historical significance to this. This is the first time you saw positive, black animation characters, with the coins. These are, real significant, African-American icons from a historical perspective, and I certainly didn't know that all these people were on coins. It's the first time that you see black people represented on, commemorative currency, and now, Harriet Tubman will be on the 20, and, Marian Anderson and Sojourner Truth and Martin Luther King will be on bills. But, I, for example, didn't know that there were so many African Americans that were represented on coins. I never really understood until I started to do the research for our exhibition, the legislative process through which, African Americans appeared on these coins. And, you start to take something that you just really think is cool, it's a beautiful representation, positive representation of black people, and you do the research and realize these are historically significant artifacts, and, there's an amazing story to tell. So that's, again, kind of the process we're going through. We collect this up because it was cool, and we thought that, black people ought to own it, so that we could tell the story around it. But as we've done more research, we realize there really is a lot of important history to tell.
So you bring up animation. I grew up in the mid to late 70s, maybe a few years later than the two of you, but I remember growing up and seeing black stereotypes and animation in the mainstream. I remember seeing Heckle and Jekyll on TV, assorted references to black characters in old Warner Brothers cartoons, the Crows and Dumbo, obviously. These were harsh and terrible stereotypes in retrospect that don't seem to soften with age. So obviously there is that type of depiction and representation. But when we get to coins and we look back at the final two coin issues of what numismatists might consider the classic commemorative period, the Booker T. Washington and Washington half dollars of 1946 to 1954, I think it's interesting to note how these two coins came about. Specifically the way the latter coin, the Washington Carver coin, was essentially created to combat the idea that Congress had that African Americans in America were susceptible to communist influence, and that a coin was needed to instill American values on the black community. The coin itself, if you read the reverse, says, "Freedom and opportunity, Americanism," even though at the time in 1951, few blacks in any part of the country enjoyed such things.
Yeah, I've definitely heard those stories. I think, what was more important to us was, because a lot of the things that we collect do have value to them because they were the first ones that were done. So, Booker T. Washington was the first, black person, free black person to appear, on a coin. He and George Washington Carver, first free black men on a coin. First coins that were, designed by, black artists. So those are some of the things that we take away from it, as well as some of the history that you mentioned. But, from our perspective, they were the first and only blacks that appeared on coins during that era. You don't really see them again until, decades later when they start back up the program. So, we always look at, just this timing around the first positive images of Black people that you see that appear, in kind of different aspects of what we collect. So that's kind of how we are looking at the Booker T and George Washington coins.
This is Pamela. I just wanted to add that Loreen and I had gone to a Black memorabilia show way back in the early 1990s. And that was really the first time that I had seen the Booker T. Washington and the George Washington Carver coin. So just imagine, being a kid growing up and your family, saved silver dollars, and the only ones that they had was the ones with the JFK image on them. And I immediately thought about my grandparents because they collected them, and how, if they were still here, they would have, enjoyed the fact of seeing someone Black on a coin. And that's really how I got interested in collecting the coins with African Americans on them, because I had no idea. It really wasn't until Loreen, decided to curate this exhibition when the discovery was made of all of the legislation that goes into getting these coins developed, and how, Congress people initiate the idea, and, all the bureaucracy that it takes to actually have a coin printed or coins minted was really, an educational journey for myself. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there.
Well, next year will be a big year for your collection. There will be another African-American motif on a U.S. coin, as the U.S. Mint will release a gold coin in high relief that bears an African-American representation of liberty, which will be a first. Did you follow the Woman on 20s campaign to replace Andrew Jackson on the $20 bill with an influential American woman?
Absolutely.
Yes.
We voted multiple times for Harriet Tubman, of course. But, certainly thought it was an interesting campaign, and, totally shocked to see that they're actually going to go through with it. But thrilled, obviously, as we're, trying to get the word out about our exhibition, For the Love of Money, Blacks on U.S. Currency, that there are going to be, Blacks on circulating, paper currency, which is just amazing. The things that are happening in our lifetime is pretty amazing. So we're very excited about it.
Why is having African-American representation on circulating U.S. currency important to you personally?
Well, if I may be frank, I think we've been here long enough, and we've contributed enough, and we have been subjugated enough that it is time for there to be representation on U.S. currency beyond what was first initiated with the images of slaves in cotton fields on Confederate money. So, in my opinion, it's long overdue.
Let's take it away from our own personal experience for a moment. What do you think the impact of having money that more fairly represents the diversity of American life? What effect do you think this might have on children growing up in the country?
Well, I think for any child, regardless of their ethnic background, but specifically for Black children, I think to see images of Blacks on coins, especially, young people who have, this need to have money and spend money and, warehouse money either in a piggy bank or their pocket, to see these images on currency could be a life-changing event, especially if they get the knowledge that goes along with why that person was so important enough to be on U.S. currency. And I think that helps change within that young person's mind how they see themselves and how they see others who look at them. and also gets an interest in learning about history again. Because I strongly believe that we have gotten away from our historical significance, whether it is slavery, which I know a lot of people are tired of talking about and hearing about, and the civil rights movement, even the Black Power movement, on up until Black Lives Matter. They're all interconnected, and from one journey to the next, there is a reason why we have had that experience. And I think money could be very useful in getting people to understand and recognize the historical significance of why it was important to put these people on currency and have this currency, circulate so people get a better understanding.
At the same time, two slave owners, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, will remain on our money uncontested. Their contribution to the country, I think, would render an argument to remove them very polarizing.
The reality is this is a capitalist, country. This country was built on money. Slavery was all about making money. So, when you think about, putting, again, Booker T. Washington, George Washington Carver, these were slaves, that became free men, that through their, hard work and intelligence and contributions to this country, irrespective of what, the motives were to get them on currency, were recognized on currency. We've gone from Booker T. Washington all the way through to the Selma marches, signed into legislation by the first Black president of the United States. It is the great equalizer in this country. It is the thing that, everybody worships and wants to, have. It's the one thing that everybody sees pretty much as being important, and to have Black people of significance represented on, the thing that makes this country operate is significant. Positive representation, fosters pride. And, we need to get back to a time when Black people were proud to be Black, and they were proud of our contributions, and, proud of who we are and what makes us different, and proud of our culture and all those things. And, being representative in a positive way is critically important to continuing to foster that pride in a society that, in every other way tells you that you don't belong here, you haven't contributed anything, you're lazy, you're worthless. The messages that we get, every day, if we didn't have that pride in ourselves, would be, mortally wounding. You know what I'm saying? You just would not be able to get out of bed in the morning if you didn't have a sense of who you really were and where you came from. And, it's critically important, that those positive representations continue. And again, that's why we do what we do. We try to contribute our little part to let people know, hey, we've contributed a lot, we've done a lot. The reality is our heroes do appear on stamps. They do appear on money. They are all around us, and, we owe it to the next generation to, document that and make sure that we don't forget it,
So I guess what you're saying is that Chuck D spoke too soon then.
He just didn't know that, there's a whole host of significant African Americans, every aspect of life and culture that are represented on postage stamps. These are important things. They mean something. They are, things that are looked upon as being honors, to be commemorated in that way. And I think that we do need to recognize, while it may not be everybody that we'd like to see, a significant number of, real significant Black people have been commemorated in these ways.
Which are your favorite coins bearing the likeness of African Americans?
Well, my favorite two would be Booker T. Washington and George Washington Carver, because that's the discovery that I made, that African Americans were on coins. My favorite commemorative coin is the Marian Anderson, because I just think that is a beautiful commemorative gold coin, and we were lucky enough to acquire 2 of them, and the significance of what she experienced as a woman of color, and then to be honored in the way that she was just phenomenal. In the same breath, I have, we have the Jackie Robinson gold coin and a number of the silver coins, and I think that's just equally remarkable as well, given, his background and what he went through as he made all of the accomplishments he did in Major League Baseball. And, I could sit here and tell you all of the coins and, tokens and bronze medals are beautiful because of what they meant for me as an African American and the history that, is involved with these people being placed on coins. I just think is fantastic.
So if you got to pick the next African American figure to appear on a U.S. coin, who would it be?
Oh, well, for me, I'd say Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, but I don't know if that's even humanly possible to do.
I think by law, the 2 would have to be deceased in order to appear on a coin. So that could take 40 or 50 years. In the immediate sense, however, who would it be?
That's an interesting question. I honestly haven't thought about it and probably can't come up with anybody off the top of my head. We probably have to get back to you on this. There's so many deserving people, but
there are. But who deservingly should be placed on a coin, but he's so controversial, I know it won't happen? Malcolm X.
Why Malcolm X?
Well, I think what he represented. I mean, he started out as a separatist, black nationalist separatist, but he also had a awakening about humanity and mankind. And I think if we look at him from the beginning until where his life ended, I think he is worthy enough of being placed on U.S. currency.
With coins and medals, because, we look at that as all being kind of currency. But I definitely think someone who's worthy of a commemorative medal would be Muhammad Ali. Just in terms of, I look at the athletes that have been honored. You look at a Jackie Robinson who's done both, coins and the commemorative medal. Look at like a Joe Louis, a Jesse Owens. Muhammad Ali is as groundbreaking an athlete, as important to, the advancement of civil rights and human rights as those athletes were. So hopefully someone is, preparing that legislation and they'll get that done soon.
That brings up an interesting point. Why do you think it is that somebody like Muhammad Ali, a man who is controversial and outspoken, especially when he converted to Islam and avoided serving in the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War, a man who a number of white sports broadcasters would not even call Muhammad Ali for a number of years, why is it, you think, that we have a fixation on black celebrity, black sports figures and entertainers that allows us to accept their blackness? But when it comes to black politicians or writers or intellectuals, we retrench our thinking along racial and ethnic lines.
I think it's interesting. I think, history is a funny thing, right? It always changes over time. Muhammad Ali was hated in his time, as was Martin Luther King, hated and assassinated in his time. But, you look at, the feeling around, Muhammad Ali now, and, Martin Luther King now, it's like, they were the, great pacifists of their time, that they were, these, amazing, figures that, never said anything controversial and, were, not perceived as being divisive from a race perspective. So, history is a funny thing. You put time and distance between things and, people, kind of look at it differently. I think, from our perspective on Muhammad Ali, again, when you look at the 70s, I mean, he was an athlete, but he was a huge celebrity. I mean, he had his own cartoon.
Yeah, he was a huge celebrity, no doubt.
Yeah, he was a huge celebrity. So I mean, you had an opportunity to get to see him in a much bigger way than just an athlete. And for folks that grew up in the 70s, you may not have necessarily known all of the strife that he went through in the 60s. You knew he was a huge, you remember his fight, after he was reinstated to boxing, but you may not necessarily remember what happened prior to that. And so you see this, amazing athlete, who's, doing these amazing things. And, you see him with Howard Cosell, and you see the interplay between them that found, wide world of sports every, weekend. And, he took on a much bigger, he became larger than life. So, I think if you were a kid growing up in the 70s, so if you weren't somebody who interacted, with Muhammad Ali in the 60s, you have a completely different, memory of him and interaction of him. And, for, black people as well as for white people at that time. So, again, history's a funny thing. It just depends on, I think, what decades you grew up in and, at what stage in their, historic, kind of progression you interacted with these people. But, now that Muhammad Ali has passed on, the tributes to him and, the glowing memories of him, completely erased everything that kind of happened in the 60s. And people remember him very differently. I mean, Martin Luther King, I see the things on, Twitter. Oh, he would never block a highway. He was not divisive. He would never. And it's like, okay, you people have never read, what this man wrote. You've heard one speech. You don't know anything about, the civil rights movement and how all that worked. But, they think they know him because, history has passed and folks are not, haven't studied him as much as they should. So,
Getting back to your museum and its exhibits, what made Black culture in the 1970s so cool?
I think, this is Pamela, I think coming out of the civil rights movement and for so many people to have, witnessed the riots, the assassinations of Malcolm and Martin, and all of the political upheaval that was taking place, it just seemed like there was a shift in the thinking, in education, in the way we were being perceived and the way we perceived ourselves. And everything just came into sync. And we were more expressive. Hollywood was creating shows that included us. Our fashion became more vibrant and in your face. And it was just a very cool time for Black people to be themselves, to actually just let it, for lack of a better way of saying it, hang out, be out, and we were just very expressive through literature, through fashion, through education, through the arts, and film. And film was one of the biggest I guess, entities at the time that really showcased Black life, whether it was for the good or for the bad, really showcased Black life in a medium that was never, well, it had been done before, but there was no domestic help, there was no slave. It was always, the Black character who was the good guy, who, got the job done, and he was the hero, and that never happened before. And then you had this explosion of all of this art with the movie posters, and then the explosion of all of this in-your-face funk music that went along with the movies and the movie posters, and then you had people showing up to these theaters and these, I don't want to say outlandish costumes, but, we got dressed up in attire that just made us feel empowered. And it was just a time that has never been replicated in that capacity again. And it was just, for us, the coolest decade ever. And I don't know how else to explain that other than it was the first time we had a very short window of time to be completely free and be who we wanted to be, and we were very expressive. And a lot of people jumped on that bandwagon to support that need to be expressive and free during that 10-year window in Black life in America.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, it was the first time that Black people had been that free, relatively speaking, in this country. You had, our generation, we're the first generation that grew up, not being oppressed under, Jim Crow. When we were coming out of segregation, we were the first generation to be integrated in schools. We were taught that, we needed to be proud of who we were. We were taught our history because, we were being taught by people who lived it and made it. Our parents and grandparents are the ones who fought for, our civil rights and our freedom. So, we got the firsthand accounts and understanding of how critically important it was to vote, for example, how important it was for us to know our history. We were really the first time that we were free in this country, and the young people coming up through late 60s, 70s were the first generation of truly free Black young people able to be themselves and express themselves and create for themselves and to tell their own stories. And a lot of what you see is an explosion of Black people, whether it be through film, through music, through even the cartoons. You had Black animators and Black directors and famous Black people that were being portrayed, like the Jackson 5, Muhammad Ali, sort of things in cartoons. It's the first time that you had Black people telling their own stories, and it's critically important in terms of bringing positive representation, which again, makes Black people more prideful when you see, positive representations of yourself, and it just kind of feeds on itself. And that's really what happened, throughout the 70s, a huge, period of Black pride and Black expression, and Black people being free to tell their own stories.
So how can people see your Traveling Funky Turns 40 exhibition?
Is at the Black History Museum in Richmond, Virginia. It'll be there through August 7th or August 10th, somewhere there. And then it goes to the Meek Eaton Archive at FAMU in Tallahassee. And it'll be there in September and October. And then we're still, putting together the traveling schedule after that. But that exhibition will continue to travel to different places around the country. Our coining exhibition hopefully will be appearing soon in a couple of locations. We'll be able to put all that information on our website, our For the Love of Money, Blacks on U.S. Currency exhibitions. And then we have exhibitions that feature what we're calling our Vintage Black Heroes, which were the first Black heroes that ever appeared in comic strips from the 1950s. And we're in the process of booking those exhibitions. So, you can check our website, museumofUncutFunk.com, to see kind of the latest locations of where our exhibitions are. And, you can visit our museum anytime because we're virtual 24/7 at museumofUncutFunk.com.
Well, Pamela and Loreen, I'd like to thank you for the work you've done cataloging this important period in Black life in America and putting together a great collection of objects, including coins and medals depicting African Americans. And I appreciate you taking the time to share with me your thoughts on representation on money. And I wish both of you the best of luck as your museum and collection grows.
Well, thank you, Charles. This has been an awesome opportunity, and we really do appreciate you considering us for this podcast. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends. And remember, you can download all of CoinWeek's podcasts for free on the iTunes Store. For CoinWeek, I'm editor Charles Morgan signing off. Happy collecting.